Okay, so good evening po sa ating lahat muli. So this is my report on Filipino folklore. So what is folklore? Usually transmitted by word of mouth, oral traditions are very common among the indigenous tribes still existent in the Philippines. So Filipino folklore. Filipino folk literature refers to the traditional oral literature of the Filipino people. Thus, the scope of the field covers the ancient folk literature of the Philippines as various ethnic groups, as well as various pieces of folklore that have evolved since the Philippines became a single ethno-political unit. Philippine folk literature in oral and print formats. While the oral and thus unchangeable aspect of folk literature is an important defining characteristic, much of these oral traditions has been written into a print format. To point out that folklore in a written form can still be considered folklore. It may appear in print but must not freeze into print like the pictures that you see. Categories of Philippines folk literature. There are three. So folk narratives, folk speech, and folk song. Number one, folk narratives, either be in prose or alamat or myth, the legend and the kwentong bayan or folk tale, or in verse. Legend, Latin legenda, things to be read, is a narrative of human actions that are perceived both by teller and listeners to take place within human history and to possess certain qualities that give the tale verisimilitude. Legends. A majority of legends operate within the realm of uncertainty, never being entirely believed by the participants, but also never being resolutely doubted. A short or mono-episodic, traditional, highly ecotypified, historicized narrative performed in a conversational mode, reflecting on a psychological level a symbolic representation of folk belief and collective experiences and serving as a reaffirmation of commonly held values of the group to whose tradition it belongs. So this is a timeline definition of legend. So in 1340, legend is a loan word from Old French and entered English. In its earliest English language usage, the word indicated a narrative of an event. In the 1510, word legendary was originally a noun, meaning a collection or corpus of legends. This word changed to legendary, and legendary became the adjectival form of legend. In 1631, English-speaking Protestants began to use the word when they wished to imply that an event was fictitious. Thus, legend gained its modern connotations of undocumented and spurious, which distinguish it from the meaning of chronicle. 1866, Jacob Grimm described the fairy tale as a poetic legend or an historic. 1925, Friedrich Rank, they characterized the folk legend as a popular narrative with an objectively untrue imaginary content, a dismissive position that was subsequently largely abandoned. In 1928, the narrative content of legend is in realistic mode, rather than the wry irony of folktale. Heisk concluded that, in spite of its realistic mode, legend is not more historical than folktale. So legends are used as a source of folklore, providing historical information regarding the culture and views of a specific legend's native civilization. Folk speech includes bugtong or riddle and salawikain, proverbs. Salawikain or proverb. Traditional sayings or maxims used by Filipinos based on local culture, wisdom, and philosophies from Filipino life. Proverbs originating from the Philippines are described as forceful and poetic expressions and basic forms of euphemisms. One notable and locally popular example of a Filipino proverb is ang taong hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa patutunguhan. Categories of Filipino proverbs based on topic expressed by Damiana L. Eugenio, mother of the Filipino folklore. Letter A, ethical proverbs, those that express a general attitude towards life and the laws that govern life itself. Letter B, proverbs that recommend virtues and condemn vices. Letter C, proverbs that express a system of values. Letter D, proverbs that express general truths and observations about life and human nature. Letter E, humorous proverbs. And letter F, miscellaneous proverbs. So, usage of proverbs. Ornaments to language, words of ancestors handed down from one generation to another, and as wisdom gained from experience, which can be quoted to express a sentiment, a statement, or an opinion, used to prevent offending other individuals, intended to provide a warning, a lecture, an advice, and as a supporting statement for a particular viewpoint or issue. So, folk songs, subclassified into those tell a story or folk ballads and those that do not, includes both traditional music and the genre that evolved from it during the 20th century folk revival. Traditional folk music, music transmitted by mouth, as music of the lower classes and as music with unknown composers. It has been contrasted with commercial and classical styles, old songs with no known composers, music that has been transmitted and evolved by a process of oral transmission and performed by custom over a long period of time. Starting in the mid-20th century, a new form of popular folk music evolved from traditional folk music. This process and period is called the Second Folk Revival and reached a zenith in the 1960s. This form of music is sometimes called contemporary folk music or folk revival music to distinguish it from earlier folk forms. This type of folk music also includes fusion genres such as folk rock, folk metal, electric folk, and others. Characteristics or historical perspective. It was transmitted through an oral tradition. The music was often related to national culture. They commemorate historical and personal events. The songs have been performed by custom over a long period of time, usually several generations. There is no copyright on the songs, fusion of cultures, and non-commercial. Origins. Letter A, ancient roots. Folk songs originated throughout most of human prehistory and history, long before recorded music was possible. Letter B, everyday life. Common people created music during both their work and leisure time. Letter C, work-related origins. Many folk songs emerged from manual and communal labor. Singing served several practical purposes during work. Letter D, leisure and storytelling. In leisure time, singing and playing musical instruments were common forms of entertainment and a way to share history and stories. Letter E. Oral tradition. Folk music was traditionally transmitted through learning by ear, although notation might also be used in some cases. Transformation and variations. Letter A. Oral transmission. B. Deliberate modification. Letter C. Geographical and cultural adoption. Letter D. Temporal changes. Letter E. Artistic interpretation. Letter F. Revival and restoration. Letter G. Natural selection process. Letter H. Influence of nationalism. And letter I. Scholarly and artistic interest. Function of folklore. In 1954, Bascom argued that folklore serves four primary functions in a culture. Number one, folklore lets people escape from repressions imposed upon them by society. Number two, folklore validates culture, justifying its rituals and institutions to those who perform and observe them. Number three, folklore is a pedagogic device which reinforces morals and values and builds wit. Number four, folklore is a means of applying social pressure and exercising social control. Okay, so thank you very much and good evening once again to each and everyone and see you next time. Thank you po.